and he showed up for this. We really appreciate that, and especially welcome to our featured speakers and Bonnie Addario, who's our author here. We just really appreciate you being here. This is Memphis Public Library's Virtual Books and Beyond with Bonnie J. Addario, author of The Living Room, A Lung Cancer Community of Courage. I'm Laura. I'm a librarian at Central Library in Memphis. With me is Juan Ying, who's the head of our adult services. Books like Bonnie's are available in our Health Information Center, which is on the 3rd floor of the Central Library. And you can also get that in ebook format if you're just going through our catalog and looking there. So our guests today include Bonnie Addario, the author of The Living Room, her daughter, Danielle Hicks, who is the Chief Patient Officer for their GoTo Foundation. With them also is Gina Hollenbach, who is a Memphian who lives with stage 4 lung cancer. And she's actually the first story in this book, so that was really special. We also have Dr. Raymond Osaro-Giagban, I hope I got that right, who works at Baptist Memorial Healthcare. He's in their thoracic oncology program. So we have a lot of really cool people here today who are going to speak and talk with Bonnie about this book. So we really appreciate you joining us. We hope that this program can be beneficial to you in some way. I just want to say personally, this book arrived at really the right time to show me compassion and knowledge so that I could help a friend who's dealing with lung cancer. And it's really funny because this book really stresses that sense of community and having that, the importance of having that support. And that was exactly what I could provide to her because of this book. So
well, that's good.
I'll let you introduce Bonnie and you guys can take it from here.
Thanks, Laura. Well, Laura did all the introductions, so I don't need to do that. And as we speak to each of these people who are guests for the talk this morning, I'm going to ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves. I'd like to open, before we jump in, with a brief synopsis of The Living Room, a lung cancer community of courage, right here, for those of you who maybe haven't had a chance to pick it up and take a read, give you a little peek into the book. So, lung cancer. The mere word strikes fear in all of us. Fear of diagnosis, the treatment, and the ultimate prognosis. Where is the hope? It can be found in The Living Room by Bonnie Addario, a 17-year survivor of stage 3B lung cancer, who established the Bonnie J. Addario Lung Cancer Foundation in 2006, along with the Addario Lung Cancer Medical Institute in 2008. She is now co-founder and chair of the GoTo Foundation for Lung Cancer. A determined activist on behalf of patients suffering from the disease, Bonnie has built an extraordinary global network of fellow activists, patients, doctors, oncologists, researchers, and caregivers. A thriving and ever-growing community devoted and committed to advocating on behalf of those patients and families affected by the disease. Among all cancer, none are more pernicious than lung cancer. Nearly 150,000 Americans are lost to this disease every year, amounting to around 400 people every single day. It accounts for 1/3 of all cancer diagnoses, the most deaths of any cancer, and as many losses as the next 3 most deadly cancers, breast, prostate, and colon combined. The Living Room, which draws its name from a virtual support and education group live streamed internationally once a month by the GoTo Foundation, tells the stories of 20 lung cancer patients who have bravely fought the disease and found ways to thrive, not just survive. The goal of Bonnie's efforts is to break down the barriers and stigmas associated with lung cancer and demonstrate how the new wave of treatment options are moving to make it a manageable disease. The people you will meet in The Living Room will lead you to believe that miracles are all around us, that they are happening every day, and that they just might happen to the next cancer patient who picks up this book. So it's a little insight into what this book is going to kind of be about and be able to give you. But I think more importantly, and what you're going to find out as we start talking here today, is something that Laura touched on, and that's the sense of community and the sense of hope. And you'll hear a little bit from Gina about her story, and of course Bonnie about hers and how she came into this. So I'm going to start with her. And, you know, I know Bonnie / mom, as Laura mentioned, considers herself a very fortunate lung cancer survivor. She was diagnosed in 2003 with stage 3B non-small cell adenocarcinoma. And at diagnosis was really told home to go home and get her affairs in order, that she probably, you know, had 3 to 6 months. And through a series of serendipitous events that I know she will touch on in a minute here, we were able to pull together what is now standard, and Dr. O can talk a little bit about that, but multidisciplinary care, where we're talking about physicians from across all the disciplines really looking at and treating each patient. And so with that, Mom, this book's been a long time in the making. Can you tell us a little bit about why you wanted to write this book?
Of course. Two reasons. One, I had been asked to come and speak at an academic center on the West Coast in their support group. And I was honored to do it. And of course I said yes. So I went there and I walked into this room, and it was a gray room, no windows, a gray rectangle table, gray folding chairs, and gray people. And I thought, there is no hope in this room at all. So I went back to work and gathered up the team, Danielle being one of them. And when I come back and I get all inspired about doing something new, I get these eyes rolling. It's like, we can't do any more, you know, stop it. But I said, no, we're going to start a support group, but it's going to be really different. We're going to bring in a key opinion leader every month to talk to the patients about what's new in lung cancer treatment and diagnosis and screening and all of those things. And we're going to bring in, and we're going to call this the living room, which was the complete opposite of the room I was in and speaking in previously. This is going to be a place that doesn't only give patients comfort, it gives them an opportunity for education and to meet with other people that have lung cancer and share their stories and build that community that Danielle was talking about. And we have built a huge community around the world. We live stream this living room production because when we first started this, we had so many patients, some were waiting outside and couldn't get in. And we thought, how can we get more of these in other zip codes? That wasn't possible and it wasn't affordable. So this one girl that works for us said, oh, she's crazy. She loves to interview politicians on local TV, you know, during the week. And she said, well, we'll just bring the TV station in here once a month and we'll live stream it through YouTube. And good news, we've reached 143 countries from this room that you're looking at right now. You know, so I think there's many points there. And one of them is with innovation, you can get anything done. When you think it's not affordable, all of a sudden, when you put your head to it and you start thinking of other opportunities, when you haven't got the dollars to spend on something, innovation always jumps in and you will find a way to get it done more cost effectively. So that was one reason I did this. But the other reason was to help rid ourselves of this horrible stigma that comes with lung cancer, that you have to be a smoker to get it, which is totally not true. Anyone can get lung cancer. All you need is lungs. And even young people can get lung cancer, which we'll talk about. We're just published, Dr. O, in JTO for the genomics of young lung. I'm so excited. It's just been, I wanted people to see the faces. So when you go through the book, you're going to see a lot of different places because I wanted to touch gender. I wanted to touch age. I wanted to touch ethnicity and make sure I had all those bases covered, along with different targeted markers. You'll hear from Gina in a little while, and she has an ALK marker, but we have somebody with the EGFR. We've got a MET and a RET, you know, and all these different things. So anything you possibly could imagine asking about lung cancer, you can find in this book. So, and I wanted people to know that ordinary people get lung cancer. Ordinary people or ordinary men and women, various different ages, various different ethnicities, various different genders. Anyone can get lung cancer. So that's the goal of this book, is to get the real story out there about lung, and the real story about the hope now. We have developed more new therapies in the last 5 years than in the last 5 decades. So that is a really hopeful message. And it seems like they're coming in on a daily basis. And Dr. O and Gina can talk to you a little bit about that. But that's the real story. And I want you to hear from these other very, very special people and, what they think about all of this.
Thank you for that. And I know you talked a little bit about targets and ALK and EGFR. And trust me, all of you who are watching right now who might not know what that means, we're going to get into that a little bit later with Dr. O when we're talking about research and clinical trials and how all of these things were found and what a difference it's made in the lives of lung cancer patients. So before I jump over to Dr. O, I want to ask, you, Bonnie, was hope something that was easy to find when you were diagnosed?
That's such a great question. The answer is absolutely no. That was way back in 2003. And actually, it still wasn't something that was there as short as 10 years ago. No. And I love what you say, Danielle, all the time. To newly diagnosed patients, do not go to Dr. Google. Get a doctor that is up to speed and a physician that is well versed on lung cancer and can treat you. And if you can't find one that you believe in, get a second opinion. But no, there was no hope then. It was chemotherapy and radiation.
Get your right?
Yeah, but I found a surgeon that was willing to do something very dramatic. That my tumor was on my heart, and they did something very dramatic. And it's just now starting to become having neoadjuvant and adjuvant therapy along with a late stage diagnosis and even early stage. So we can talk more about that.
Yeah, you were when I opened up saying that you were a very fortunate survivor. That is the absolute truth. And the interesting thing is the treatment that you had when you were diagnosed with the neoadjuvant space, with the chemotherapy and the radiation prior to surgery, and the big surgery that was done with not only the thoracic lung team, but the cardiac team doing the repairs to your heart was a big deal, right? And it's something that is done more often now, right? It wasn't done that often, if at all, in 2003. So, moving forward and learning. So in the 17, 18 or so years since your diagnosis and with starting the foundation, you've seen a lot of folks walk in and out of this room and listen to them on the other end of the line. And hope was found somewhere in there, right? So what is it, why is it important to you that patients find hope and remain hopeful?
Well, my lovely friend, Evie Schiffman, quotes Emily Dickinson all the time, and she describes hope as the thing with feathers that perches in your soul. And hope is something that comes from within. And you either have it or you don't. But I think everybody needs to search for it, because once you become hopeful, your lung cancer journey is much easier and probably much more beneficial.
Perfect. So I'm going to jump to Dr. O for a second, and then we're going to get into the meat of this conversation with my friend Gina Hollenbach. But Dr. O, can you tell us a little bit to start off with about yourself and why lung cancer is a primary area of focus for you?
Sure, Danielle. Good morning to everyone. Good to see so many friends out there. Bonnie gives you essentially the epitome of why this is important. I'm a thoracic medical oncologist. Which means that I am the type of doctor that traditionally in the past gave chemotherapy to patients with stage 4 lung cancer, and that was just about it. Fortunately, things are evolving very, very fast now. We have gone from a world in which we had maybe 2, 3, 4 things that might, give you some modest reason to try to use them, to a world now in which even a guy like myself, entirely focused on thoracic oncology, struggles to keep abreast of all the emerging dynamic change that is all around us. So I'm a thoracic medical oncologist, which means that all I do is take care of patients with lung cancer. And the reason why I do that is lung cancer is still the biggest public health challenge of our age as far as oncology goes. It is worldwide the number 1, number 2, or number 3 cancer in almost every country. And worldwide, it is the number 1 in most cases, and in a few cases, number 2 killer in almost every country of men and women. So huge public health burden. It is also a fiendishly complex cancer. Just think about it for a minute. It's a cancer that is in a privileged location. It's in the lungs. Why are the lungs privileged? All around it, you have your spine, your ribs, and your breastbone. It's got a fortress around it. Within the chest cavity, you have a heart and the great vessels, big blood vessels, just begging you to foolishly come in and do something risky. And of course, the lungs themselves are balloons. They're inflated balloons. You do anything with the lungs, like any balloon, you pop them, and guess what? If you don't know what you're doing, you're in trouble. So it's very easy to look at that fortress and say, well, how are we ever going to scale it? Well, you know what? Let's just go home. Let's not try. The patients, lung cancer tends to be a cancer that people get later on in life. So along with age and all the comorbidities that you accumulate comes a certain amount of frailty, okay? So one of the things that we say is there are not that many triathletes, 30-year-old triathletes with lung cancer. Mostly what you have are 60 and 70-year-old men who have had heart attacks and strokes and maybe survived other cancers. And so that stereotype, with the stigma that comes with the fact that, yes, traditionally, smoking has been the number 1 risk factor, makes it where people look at a lung cancer patient and say, fortress, can't scale it. Even when you try, chances of success are slim. The patient, we secretly think maybe had it come in, had many chances to quit, opted to smoke, and therefore maybe had it come in. So there's not enough sympathy that we have seen traditionally for the lung cancer patient. It's almost an embarrassment for the patients and even their doctors when they talk sometimes, when they don't know somebody's watching. There is that sense of, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So there's a need for people to come in with expertise that will focus on this problem the way it deserves to be focused on, that does exactly what Bonnie talked about. Brings hope, brings respect, brings compassion, but also brings knowledge. That knowledge is hard-won, comes from focus and daily experience, which not every doctor is willing to do. Therefore, what we have to do is bring the teams of like-minded, dynamic, interested, intelligent people who are also compassionate to come together in the service of our patients. So that's why I chose to become a thoracic oncologist.
I love that, and having been friends for a long time with you and being very familiar with all the work that you're doing. Oops, sorry. Over there, I know that what you said is what you're delivering to your patients. So we can't thank you enough. And I know Gina's going to talk a little bit about that. So before we move on to Gina, I want to ask you, what roles do we talked about hope and we talked about the importance of it, but what role does that piece of this sort of pie play in patient outcomes and quality of life? Like, do you see a measurable difference in those outcomes in people who lose hope versus those who are able to attain it?
Oh, yes. So I'm a health services researcher. One of the things that I have done over the decades is looked at large data sets, analyzing what are the characteristics of the patients who do well and not so well. And one thing that always struck me that I never really could figure out until recent years was patients who are married, lung cancer patients who are married, consistently had better survival than lung cancer patients who were unmarried. Didn't make sense. What does that have to do with the biology of cancer? I always wondered. Well, I have come to learn as we have evolved over time that somewhere in there comes words like hope, encouragement, support, the kinds of things that take you past numbers into the basic humanity of who we are, rooting for one another, cheering each other on, dragging each other along, pushing each other forward, doing all the things that you have to do in the face of unseemly odds. Hope absolutely has a huge benefit in survival and, of course, the quality of life.
That's fantastic. And I think, you said hope, encouragement, and support, and I'm going to lift up the book again, but I think that's exactly what you find in this book with the 20 folks who share their stories. It is that hope, that encouragement, and that support. And so with that, I'm gonna switch over to Gina for a minute and ask her. Gina has a chapter in the book, and ask her to give us a sneak peek into what you can expect in her chapter, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Doctor, you had me tearing up when you were talking about he knows firsthand that my husband Greg has been with me every step, and he's a pilot, so sometimes he'll FaceTime in with my doctor's appointments from France or wherever he is, and Dr. O knows that he's always been a part of this journey. So anyway, that definitely had me tearing up. But about my story and about my chapter in the book, in 2015, I was actually training for a triathlon. I'm a nurse, and I was working, and I had a persistent cough, and something just felt wrong. I was playing some competitive tennis, and I started going to, I was never sick, so I didn't even have a primary care physician. So I went to my OBGYN, my ENT, my orthopedic doctor, 4 different doctors said, Gina, nothing's wrong. And I said, I think something is wrong. And they're like, no, you're healthy. You train for triathlons. You just ran a 5K. You're fine, and they kind of treated me like I was being a hypochondriac. I knew in my head, though, that something was wrong. So I went to a diagnostic imaging center, and I asked if I could get a chest x-ray. And they said, well, do you have a doctor's order? And I said, no, but I'm happy to pay for it. So I paid $75 for a chest x-ray that showed that there was something very wrong. All of the doctors, I kept saying, do you think this is breast cancer? Do you think this is lung cancer? What do you think this is? And the thing that kind of hit me was that I was losing weight, but not trying. And so with no explanation. And so that's why in my head, I thought this might be cancer. And they said, Gina, you're 37 years old and you've never had a history of smoking and you have no family history. No, Gina, here's some allergy medicine. You're going to be okay. And so anyway, once I got that chest x-ray, it showed some really ominous signs that there was a dark shadow over my left lung. So I took that chest x-ray report to the emergency room for exactly what they tell you not to, a cough. And so I looked just like I do now. I didn't look like I was sick. I knew that I was losing weight and I had a cough. And thankfully, that ER doc really took me seriously. And he did a CT scan. On a Tuesday night, a pulmonologist called me back and he told me that he found from a biopsy that I had tumor cells in my lungs. And so on the next day, I had an appointment with Dr. O for the very first time that I would meet him. In between that Tuesday night and that Wednesday morning, I definitely got on Dr. Google. So that I found out as a nurse that anyone with lungs can get lung cancer. I found out that not only did I have cancer, but I had the #1 cancer killer of men and women. And I thought, how could this be? As a nurse, I even taught smoking cessation programs, and I thought you had to smoke to be able to get lung cancer. I never had any risk factors. And so the next day when I met Dr. O, I saw that, the statistics were pretty grim. And so I asked him, like, what do you think? How long do I have to live? And he told me something that was very profound. He said, Gina, statistics are statistics, but your story is your own. And he said, I'm going to do everything I can to help you cure this disease. And I thought he was absolutely awesome. And I loved everything about him. But I told him, but I'm here in Memphis and you are too. But I got to get the very, very best. So I'm going to go to a big major teaching hospital and see if I can get something else. And I thought that he might be a bit offended by that, but he wasn't. In fact, he said, yes, Gina, go get all the information you can. And I'm here to help you with any of that if you need me. So I did go to that major teaching hospital and they basically handed me a hospice manual. We found out Dr. O was very smart. He knew to do biomarker testing and he knew that lung cancer liked to go to the brain. We did an MRI and we found that yes, indeed, there was cancer in my brain. And so when I went to that major teaching hospital, they said maybe 10 months. During that time, we found out that I was actually positive for a biomarker. I was ALK positive. And so I came back with that information to the head of the thoracic oncology department at this major teaching hospital. And I said, guess what? I hit the lung cancer lottery. I'm ALK positive. And he said, well, that will give you 4 years to live. And I said, the Dr. O at least wants to try to cure me. So I'm going back to Memphis. And that was the best decision I ever made. I have an amazing multi-D team who takes care of me. We got me on a targeted therapy, and almost 5 years later, here I am, still alive, and not just alive, but with a high quality of life, thanks to Dr. O and his team. And when I was diagnosed in 2015, there were only 2 targeted therapies, and since then, now there's 6, and so that gives me so much hope. And when I was at that major teaching hospital, I spent every day in the library looking up the new research that was coming out. And that's one of the reasons that I knew that the head of the thoracic oncology department was wrong. I said, there's new things coming out all the time. And if we're honest, right now we're closer than ever to a cure than we've ever been. We're finding more new innovative things. We're looking at the DNA of cancer, figuring out what's driving it and learning how to stop it. And so it's absolutely incredible. And there is lots of hope. So anyway, bringing you to the future, I started a clinical trial and had a really scary event. And I wound up in CVICU. But while I was there, I asked my husband to bring me this book because, well, there it is, because it is filled with hope. And I wanted to focus on all the stories in here when it seemed like there was no possible solution, there was no way out. Again and again, something happened, and more research is being done and more things are being created. And I wanted my focus to be on the hope while I was sitting in the CVICU. And I was so honored when I was there. Dr. O came to visit me and brought his son and showed that I was, he told him that I was the face of courage. But the reason that I have courage is because these type of stories are being spotlighted and they're being shown, and I could focus on the hope for my future too. And so anyway, Dr. O says I have a big smile, and I do, because I have a lot to smile about. In fact, I'm a very lucky girl. Maybe I have stage 4 lung cancer that's incurable, but I have an amazing team, and I have people who are on my side, people like Bonnie, who are fighting for patients to make sure that they get the best care, people like Dr. O, who are making sure that he's working as hard as he can to help find a cure for me and patients just like me. And so while I feel special, I know that he treats all his patients like that. And so I just want other patients to know that this book is just filled with hope. And so I'm excited to be a part of it.
Thanks, Gina. It's so interesting, and in my role at the foundation, that I talk to patients from all over the world, and some of them, they all come in at during different parts of their experience or journey. And I hate to call it a journey because that makes it sound like you're going someplace fun, right? But this experience, and it's almost palpable, the difference between somebody who has that hope on the other end of the line and somebody who doesn't. And a lot of that has to do with exactly kind of how you started your story, right? Talking about Dr. O and some of the things he said to you day one, right? That was your first sort of experience, versus had you gone to that other center first where they handed you the hospice, sort of manual, would you have moved forward in the same way that you did, right? And so that's Bonnie likes to talk about serendipity all the time, and things sort of happening for a reason and when they should. And I think your story is a perfect example of that. So what do you hope, Gina? I mean, you talked a little bit about your story. I mean, and you talked about how you have hope, but can you talk about sort of what that hope has meant to you throughout sort of the process and what sort of role it's played?
Sure. I think that when we hang on to hope and we have that hope, our perspective is brought to a more, I guess, positive range. And I have this saying, it's mud or stars, and you can read about it in the chapter. But it's two men look through prison bars. One sees the mud and one sees the stars. And so that's just saying that you can't always control your situation, but you can control your perspective. And that's what hope gives us. And I think that when you have that one small voice of hope, if you continue to have that hope, it can spread, and it can spread to the people around you, and you can make sure that other people can also experience hope. The truth is, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow, and so we have to be where our feet are. And we have to make sure that we're looking towards hope and seeing that right now we can either look at the mud or the stars. And so my choice is stars, baby. Stars all the way.
I'm going to use that multiple times. I'll give you credit for it. Always, Gina. That's
I love that. And I think, obviously, you found hope in Dr. O, and we talked about your husband a little bit in your family. Where outside of sort of the healthcare realm and like a family realm were you able to find this hope? Like for lung cancer patients who may, be watching this now, or for those who may know somebody that's diagnosed, like where did you find that hope?
Well, I mean, Dr. O was the first one who gave me hope, and he said, statistics aren't your expiration date. Your story is your own. So he's the first one who truly gave me hope that maybe I could be one of the first people with stage 4 lung cancer to be cured. And so he did give me that hope. And I think there's a difference between false hope and being educated. But the more educated you are, the more that you can see that new things are developing all the time. And so for me, Dr. O was the first one to give me that hope. And then I brought that back to my children when I had to tell them about my diagnosis. The hardest thing ever was to tell my children, we don't know what the future holds, but we're going to stay positive. And so I've always been completely honest with them. I wanted them to hear about the situation and the things that were occurring with me before anyone else heard them. And my husband and I have always been together on this journey. We said that when I received the diagnosis of cancer, my entire family received that diagnosis. So we were going to teach them how to do it, looking for hope all the time and never giving up. My family are my boy. I have two boys and my husband. They're all athletes, and so we look at Dickie V, and he says never give up. And that was kind of our thing. And we can even look at some of my cancer journey and project that onto their lives too, that you work hard, you stay positive, and you never give up.
I think it's so Gina, like Bonnie, are sort of superheroes in this space, in that they're part of the larger lung cancer community. So it's never just about them. And I think the both of you are out there daily, right? Gina, you not just with your out group, but with this broader lung cancer community, and Bonnie, you as well. And I know there's a lot of hope to be found within that community. Gina, can you talk a little bit about sort of the folks that surround you and those that inspire you and that you inspire, not just those in the book, but what does that, being part of that, mean to you?
Sure. I guess a few months after I was diagnosed, I joined a Facebook support group, and it was amazing because there were people just like me, and we were looking at our diagnosis, but and looking at treatments and testing. And then I found out about the living room when it was, given to us virtually. And then not only did we have the hope of meeting the survivors, but we also had the hope from the people who devote their lives to the research and lung cancer. And that was so exciting to get more knowledge. And that was one of the things that I think always kind of kept me going, as I always wanted to study and I wanted to find out more and see what we could learn about this disease. And my support group was so incredibly powerful, and even steering my treatment, because there were people from all over the world with ALK experts being treated. And I was learning more and more about my disease through these other patients. And so I realized how important these support groups are. And so one of the things that I and some other support group members from other biomarkers, we got together so that we could support each other. And that's one of the things that Bonnie always has emphasized, that together we are better. Together we're stronger. So what that means to me is that, like, you can put it into a multidisciplinary setting. Together, all of those doctors working together for me are better. We can put it into the lung cancer community. All these advocates, no matter what your biomarker, if you have no biomarker, all of us working together for one common cause is the thing that can show, so much hope. And when you read the stories of these people, if you get to know them, I mean, a lot of people tell me that my story is incredible, but I like to say that I'm not a unicorn. There's so many out there that have incredible stories, and Bonnie highlights so many of them. But I think that the real narrative has to change to really highlighting what Bonnie did here, that there's a lot of people out there, and anyone with lungs can get lung cancer. And it's the #1 cancer killer of men and women. So we can celebrate each little victory that we have, but we have to realize that we have a long way to go. And the best way to get there is together.
I love that. I love that. I could not agree with you more. And I remember, we're gonna jump into the next segment here, but I remember the first time I met Gina. We were obviously, this was pre-COVID, and I think pretty shortly after you were diagnosed, Gina. And we used to take the living room on the road, and we were doing a regional living room with Dr. O in Memphis, and Gina was on the panel and one of our guest speakers. And I remember Dr. O saying, you wait till you meet Gina. You have to meet Gina because she's such an amazing human. And of course, we couldn't agree with him more. Bonnie, before we jump into Dr. O, and we're going to talk about some of the hope outside of just the human experience, but in the research realm, I know you explained at the beginning how you wanted sort of a diverse set of patients in this book, but you could only pick 20. And I know you've talked to thousands of patients over the last, almost 2 decades now. How hard was it, just out of curiosity, for you to just pick 20?
It took longer to do that than it took to write the book.
Right.
Because obviously, Gina knows how I am firsthand. You call, I'm there. And there's so many people I love as much as I do Gina. And I didn't want anybody's feelings to be hurt. But it was important that we covered all of lung cancer in this book in a very different way than it's ever been written about before, because you hear about these patients' marriages and their kids and their mothers and their fathers and their sisters and their journey. Like Danielle said, a lot of patients don't like to call this a journey because that's a vacation. We still don't know quite what to call it, do we, Gina? But it was hard. It was really hard. There's so many people out there with inspiring stories. But I can tell you this, when you open the book and you read all the stories, you will find yourself in there, maybe in a combination of ways, or you go, oh my God, that's just like me. You'll find yourself, and that'll bring you hope through your journey. It'll bring you hope, because these people are not only surviving, they're thriving.
That's great. Thank you. So Gina, one final question. What do you hope people who read this book take away from it?
Well, I think you said it right there. I want them to have hope. I think just that one little voice of hope, and that small little desire that maybe there's something better. Maybe I have a hope in a future. I think that's what my biggest desire is, that people can see that there is hope and that things are changing. And because of advocates like Bonnie and doctors like Dr. O, who are doing research to change and move the needle on lung cancer, that we can all have hope.
That's great.
And one more thing, Danielle, and then I promise I'll be quiet. Also in the book, everything that a patient needs to learn upon diagnosis is in there in some form or fashion. Do you have a multidisciplinary team? Do they have a tumor board? Are they doing comprehensive genomic profiling? Are they running all of the tests that can be run to make sure you get the absolute right therapy first line?
Great.
So they will be able to have a patient-physician conversation with their doctor after they read this book, because they'll know what all those buzzwords mean.
Yep. This is a great sort of, like I said, segue into the next hopeful piece of this conversation. You've heard, us talk about the research. You've heard Gina talk about clinical trials, and if we take a step back to how all of this hope comes to be from a clinical treatment standpoint, it really does start in this research and clinical trial sort of arena. So Dr. O, there's a lot of fear and concern in the cancer community in general, right? Not just lung cancer, about clinical trials and participating in them. People thinking it's sort of, their grandfathers or great grandfathers now clinical trial. Can you talk a little bit about how clinical trials are today?
Sure. So this year happens to be the 50th anniversary of the war on cancer, which President Nixon declared the National Cancer Treatment Act. And what that did for us was it brought a lot of resources, investments into understanding the biology of what makes a cell become a renegade, which becomes a cancer. Fast forward 50 years, and a lot of that knowledge is bearing fruit. A lot of serendipity, that word again. Not only did we get the resources, but our knowledge of genetics expanded exponentially. The HIV epidemic, paradoxically, forced us to understand more about how the immune system works. And that knowledge from that horrible episode in our national lives, our worldwide experience, has brought these insights that now allow us to understand what makes a cell tick, what makes a cancer tick. So, for example, we have moved from a world in which it was lung cancer, it was lung cancer, it was lung cancer, to one where we became proud it was non-small cell lung cancer and small cell lung cancer. And then to a world in which it was, okay, adenocarcinoma and squamous cell cancer, to one in which it's not a monolith anymore. It's what is the genetics of your cancer? Is it an EGFR mutated lung cancer? Is it an ALK mutated lung cancer? Is it RET? Is it BRAF? Is it MET exon 14 skipping? Is it KRAS? Are you a high PD-L1 expressing lung cancer? Right? That's not the patient. I'm asking the cancer now directly. Who are you? Are you an ALK? Are you an EGFR? All of this has come from research. And research is not sitting down and somewhat vaguely hoping that, something good will come out of this. This is with the rigor of science, with the power of human ingenuity, taking the unknown with very highly intelligent guesses and then making it real. Okay. So when we say we want to do a clinical trial now, it is no longer a shot in the dark. It is, we understand that this particular cell eats up this particular thing, expresses this particular other thing. The analogy I give is we say there are all these locked doors. There is a particular door we want to unlock. It has a key. The thing that modern biology, modern research, modern science has done for us is it has allowed us to be able to fashion that key that unlocks that specific door, okay? But for us to be able to truly open the door where we let everybody in, we first have to prove that that key works every single time. And that's where clinical research comes in, okay? It is not doing experiments on humans the way people might think, oh, I don't want to be a guinea pig. The way it is today is we know that the best treatment is a clinical trial. I say that as my mantra. And the reason why I say that is we know that patients who are enrolled into clinical trials live longer and they have better quality of life. Get this, even when the clinical trial fails. So even when the drug that you were hanging your hopes on proves not to be successful, if you look at those people who are within the confines of a clinical trial, because we have to have so much oversight of safety and effectiveness, of comfort, and these days with patient-reported outcomes, patients telling us, it's not the doctor telling the patient, but the patient telling the doctor, teaching the doctor, this little side effect that you have called little, to me is not little. This is a big deal, okay? My hiccup, please don't dismiss it. It is adversely affecting my quality of life. You take all of that into consideration, and suddenly, patients who go on clinical trials do much better. And all the things about challenges in delivering care, the poor, the less fortunate, people who live in rural areas who have relatively difficult access to care. When you look at people who are within the confines of a clinical trial, all those kinds of things, rurality, urban, metropolitan, rich, poor, insured, not insured, the moment you're able to get into the vehicle of a clinical trial, it transports you to a better place. So things like rural people will have worse cancer outcomes. On a clinical trial, vanished. It's gone. That disparity is gone. Another example of why the best treatment is a clinical trial, another example of why we really need to encourage more people to get on clinical trials, but more importantly, we need to force our healthcare systems to become clinical trial purveyors. Because one of the great tragedies and great scandals of our healthcare delivery system today is that it's only about 5% of cancer patients who are able to get on a clinical trial. 5% of adult cancer patients. If you look at pediatrics, okay, children with cancer, 60 to 80% of them get on clinical trials. No wonder pediatric oncology has streaked so far ahead of adult oncology, where most pediatric cancers today are curable. Even after they recur, they are still curable. That's where we really need to get to in adult oncology. And the thing that's going to take us there is clinical trial participation.
So why do you think, I mean, I guess from being a parent, I think, it makes sort of sense to me why the pediatric space, because parents will do anything for their children, right? And to try to make them better. Why do you think there's such a discrepancy? Like, why aren't these same adults taking care of themselves?
Yes, that's a great question, Danielle. And forever and a day, that question has been posed in such a way that it makes it seem like patients don't want to get into clinical trials. And that may well have been true in pockets in times in the past. But I will tell you, as we have come to measure objectively, okay, we now understand that the biggest obstacle to patients getting into clinical trials is not patients not wanting to get into clinical trials. It's the healthcare systems and the care delivery environments not providing clinical trials. So the vast majority of places where people go to get lung cancer care do not even provide clinical trials, okay? And then the next biggest problem is when you go to a place that does offer clinical trials and there are clinical trials relevant to your cancer, the people like myself, I will freely confess, in the past, who have designed these clinical trials have made them sort of high barriers to entry. We wanted those proverbial triathletes who happen to have lung cancer to come into the clinical trials, okay? And so we create all this, you don't qualify, you don't qualify, you don't qualify, you don't qualify, you do qualify. And one of the things that we're doing with the FDA and ASCO and Friends of Cancer Research and other advocacy groups is to say, okay, enough. We don't want to have clinical trials that are successful, and then when we try to apply them in real world communities, they prove to be worse than what they promised, just because we set the bar too high and the people we're now treating are not any way, shape, or form similar to the people that we tested the drugs in. So this idea of opening up clinical trial eligibility, making the face of the clinical trial the face of the cancer in our communities, is another big reason why we need to, reconfigure things. And then you get to the point where, yes, indeed, given access to a trial that you're eligible for, it now becomes the doctor's responsibility to communicate clearly to his patient, her patient, to help them understand that, as I said, the best treatment is a clinical trial. So it's not just about the patients, it's about the healthcare systems and it's about the clinicians. That is one thing that I'm beginning to talk a lot more about because that's where the evidence is.
Yeah, I think it, from just a rational thought sort of standpoint, it makes sense. And we touched on a little bit earlier, and I know we've talked about it a lot in forums similar to this. Most of the folks are seen in the smaller community centers, right? Not like out at Baptist where you guys have a whole academics type, setup going on. And those patients are seeing medical oncologists who are expected to know everything there is about every cancer out there, right? They have to treat what walks in the door. And then on top of that, to ask them to be up to date with what clinical trials are also going on out there, right? And I think it's one of the ways that that second opinions, you know, kind of come into play for this type of information, and really foundations like GoTo being able to help guide those patients to the right place, right, so to get the best care up front. I think too, and I would love your thoughts on this, and again, talking with patients over, you know, the last decade and a half, you know, the patients who are diagnosed with lung cancer as a median sort of tend to skew older, right? And when we talk about this grandfather thing, I think a lot of them still assume that the way these studies are set up, it's a, you know, a placebo or a sugar pill versus a trial drug. Can you talk a little bit about how that has sort of changed?
Yes, we have evolved now. We have evolved. I think when you have just the doctor voice and the doctor wants to honor his high science and sometimes might forget the need to honor the life at risk. As patients and advocates have become much more vocal, I think what we have found is where there's a will, there's a way. You can both have a very rigorous, scientifically rigorous clinical trial while also opening the door for people to be comfortable within the confines of your clinical trial so that the patient gets what they desire, the scientist gets what he or she desires. So a lot of our clinical trials now, for example, with the complexity of biomarker-driven lung cancer, where it's not, oh, there are, you know, 240,000 annual lung cancer patients anymore. It's now there are 5,000 lung cancer patients with the NTRK mutation. There are 10,000 patients with the RET mutation. And when we want to do a clinical trial, we have to make sure that when the patients are screened for those clinical trials, there is something for everyone. So you don't come in and then it's like, you know, taking part in a lottery where there's a small chance that you might, you know, be eligible and everybody else, oh, sorry, go home. Where we now say, look, you come on in and it's a large chamber, the entryway, but when you come on in, there are different passages that you can go depending on what the characteristics of your cancer are. Okay, and when you get on these things, what we have now are these drugs that are so highly effective that we are not shy about comparing them to the standard of care. So on a clinical trial, oftentimes what we can assure you is that you will get no worse than what you would get if you didn't join the clinical trial. Guarantee there's a floor. You won't go below it. But there is the possible extra that if, as we think, this new treatment may well be superior, but we don't know it, we're guessing, and we can't guess with human lives, we have to prove it, okay? If you get into the clinical trial, this is the only way that you can gain access to this. And then the moment it becomes clear that what we thought is true, that this new way to do it is in some way superior, we stop. And then we open up. And there are different ways in which the FDA makes us stop and open up. Sometimes they make us do an early phase. We do an early phase trial just to prove that something is worth continuing with. And more these days, we see that the difference is so great that it's, yeah, you still need the proof, but it's just way too good to pass upon. An example just came up 2 weeks ago with a drug called sotorasib, with the KRAS G12C mutation, where there was a phase 2 trial done, didn't compare to anything, just everybody who was on that trial got the drug because they had the luck and a key had been fashioned that looked like it could open that door, okay? And they put just enough people to be able to open the door and open the door just wide enough to know that, yeah, this is the chamber we want to get into. And then they didn't shut the door. The FDA didn't say, okay, close the door and do a big clinical trial. They said, we are going to approve this drug to be used on the market, flung the door wide open. But at the same time, we still want proof in a huge population so we can calibrate just how well does it work, in what kinds of people does it work best, in what other kinds of people does it not work quite as well. So there's a phase 3 trial that's continuing at the same time as the drug is commercially available. So you say, well, why would I want to go on a clinical trial if I can just buy the drug? Well, first of all, on the clinical trial, the drug will be given to you free. Where that free is always good. And then there are legitimate questions that we need to understand. There are all these co-mutations that come along with that KRAS gene mutation. And there are hints that some of them tell you who's really going to do well, home run well, and maybe some of them tell you who may not do quite so well. It will take putting people into that best treatment, a clinical trial, to be able to answer those questions so that next time, 3 years from now, we will be talking about a whole new set of hope that has come out of the work of these clinical trials.
I think that's great. And I think just to kind of recap some of the high points on that, everyone should consider a clinical trial or have conversations with their physicians about clinical trials. We talked a lot about clinical trials in this sort of targeted therapy space, but that's not the only space that clinical trials are available. So it's definitely worth talking about. So at what point in the journey, and I'm being mindful of time before I get final thoughts from everybody, should someone consider a clinical trial? Is it sometimes the first line treatment, the best option is a clinical trial for patients?
It's always part of the conversation, right from the beginning. At every juncture, it should be part of the conversation, right from the beginning through each step of the way, across the spectrum. Even when it's early detection, trying to figure out, is there a screening test to find lung cancer early? Even if it's curable lung cancer by surgery, we are actively doing clinical trials in people who we know we can cure the cancer, but we know also it's not a guaranteed cure. And we want to get to an age in which we say, you got lung cancer? We got that. No worries, 100% success. It's going to take those kinds of clinical trials to keep doing it. So a clinical trial, always a key part of the conversation every time.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Lung cancer is many, many diseases, not just one, right? And I think that the amount of research that has been done, and even just since I've been working officially in this space since 2008, I mean, that was back in the day when really chemotherapy was, other than one targeted EGFR, right? Tarceva, I think, was out at the time. Otherwise, we would talk about it in the conference room, like, gosh, we're just throwing pasta at the wall and kind of trying to see what sticks, right? Whereas this clinical trial space is more targeted, it is more personalized. Quite often, you get even better, at least more highly monitored care than you would, locally. So thank you, Dr. O, for all of that information about clinical trials. I'm going to ask all three of you. I see we lost Bonnie for just like a quick second, but she's back on to just give some final thoughts just around hope and community and this book before we say our thank yous and goodbye. And Dr. O, I'll start with you since you were the last one to speak.
Well, I think these are exciting times. These are exciting times to be working in lung cancer space. 25 years ago, when I started my journey as an oncologist, when people would ask me, what are you doing these days, Ray? I would say, lung cancer. And it was like, why would anybody want to do that? Well, because there was a need, right? And thank God, I and the whole army of people around the world who have really answered the bell, we have been able to move everything to where we are today, where I can sit here and tell you my fearless prediction. Someday within my lifetime, I believe lung cancer will be a curable disease just like tuberculosis. We forget that there was a time in the 20th century when TB was a surgeon's disease. You had surgery to treat tuberculosis, and then they sent you up to a sanatorium up a mountain or whatever it was, right? We wouldn't even think of that anymore. If somebody said tuberculosis today, you don't cringe and say, oh, death, like we have done traditionally with lung cancer. I think we're now clearly at a time where we will say lung cancer, smile, and keep moving.
Yep.
I love that. I love that. Gina, how about you? Any final thoughts?
Sure. Dr. O, when he walks in your room, he always wears this button that says, ask me about clinical trials. And so I did at the beginning of my diagnosis. I asked him about them, but I wasn't able to participate in any because of the exclusion criteria. So I think that moving forward, there are a few things that we can learn. And I think there's even silver linings of COVID. And one of those is the clinical trial design. We really have to be considerate of what is the burden that this is costing the patient, not just the expense, but what about I have to leave my children behind. So I joined a clinical trial about 4 weeks ago, and a phase 1 clinical trial. But what is the burden that we're actually asking patients to endure? And it's not just about money. It's about leaving your life behind to be able to do some of the things that could be done in the comfort of your own house. A CBC is a CBC wherever you get that. And so looking into those and could we really modernize clinical trials at this point? And I think that the answer is yes. And that's one of the silver linings of COVID. We actually saw that telemedicine can be an effective tool to take care of patients. Could we put this onto clinical trials and really modernize clinical trials to make it easier for patients to be able to participate? And if we do that, then we can have higher accrual rates, better data, faster treatments to the bedside of patients. And so I think that's one of the things that as a clinical trial participant, I can see that we can really work on addressing. But when it comes to this book, I think that, we're at an amazing time right now, like I said, closer than ever to a cure. And I think that as we modernize things and we look at the stories of people from the past, from the book, that we can really take that to give us hope, that there is hope for the future, that just like Dr. O said, it's going to be, oh, you have lung cancer? No problem one day. So that's my hope.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And Bonnie, any final thoughts?
Everything has been covered, so amazingly well, in this last hour. I don't want to, be repetitive, but Dr. O, you did say that patients want sympathy. They don't. They want empathy. They don't want you to feel sorry for them. They want you to empathize with them and join together and partner on the treatment and, hopefully what the hope is for the future. And Gina, everything you said about clinical trials, I've been saying this for years. We have to bring the trials to the patients. We can't expect them to travel to the sites. You could have a great clinical trial. One is in California and the other one is in New York, and then there's nothing in between. So, and these things can be done. They can all be done.
To address disparities.
If we all work together, we're better and we can get it done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before I turn it over to Laura to close out, I just want to say a huge thank you to Dr. O, Gina, Bonnie, you for sharing your stories. I want to encourage people to read this book. The 20 folks highlighted in here are your neighbors. They're your friends. They're the clerks at your supermarket. They are real people, just like you and I and everybody on this call today. So please, please, please read this book. You will find yourself or someone you know in there for sure, as Bonnie said earlier. Thank you to the Memphis Public Library, to Baptist Cancer Center for supporting this book, and to all of you watching. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Danielle, can I just say one thing? Sure. Every time a book is purchased, that funding goes to research. It's not going in anybody's pocket.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We just are so grateful that you guys were here and could share not only the book, but just that story of hope, that idea that as you've all reiterated over and over, this is not the end, and this is just, maybe not a journey, but it's, part of the process of an experience, and that there are opportunities out there, and that, it's interesting, like you were saying, just that COVID has taught us a lot, and I think one of those things is that community is so important. And so with that in mind, I did put in the chat some quotes from the book, a link to our health resources page on the Memphis Library website. There's books, there's ebooks, but the library also has a lot of other things. One of those is that community. You can connect with a lot of people there at the library. So I would encourage you to look that up. Check out the library space if you're really looking for that community. And we just say thank you to everybody who joined us. We say thank you especially to Bonnie, to Danielle, to Gina, and Dr. O. I won't try to pronounce his name again, but I just really appreciate you guys being here and doing this with us, and giving us the chance to hear this story, and know that it's going on right in Memphis, that it's not just California, just New York, but that this is the kind of thing that we can do here too. So I appreciate that.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, y'all have a good one.